3 years. One night, one secret that could destroy everything or save it all. Serena Vale never planned to walk back into the life of the most dangerous man she had ever met. She only needed a job, a roof over her daughter's head, a chance to breathe. But the moment the iron gates of the Viscari estate swung open and she stepped onto those stone steps with 4-year-old Arya on her hip, something in her gut told her she had made a catastrophic mistake. She just didn't know how catastrophic yet. If you've ever loved someone you had no business loving, someone who could ruin you with a single word, then this story is for you. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and old cigarettes, and Arya had fallen asleep against Serena's shoulder somewhere around the 40-minute mark, her small mouth open, one fist curled against her cheek. Serena watched the city dissolve behind them, the crowded storefronts, the noise, the familiar ugliness of the neighborhood she had lived in for 3 years, and felt the specific terror of a woman who has just done something irreversible. She had taken the job. It hadn't been a difficult decision, technically. The rent on her apartment was 60 days past due. Her shifts at the diner had been cut to 3 days a week after the new manager decided he didn't like the way she talked back. Arya's daycare had sent a second notice. A third was coming. The math was brutal and simple. She needed money, and the Vescari household had offered more money per month than Serena had ever seen on a single paycheck in her life. The agency had been straightforward about it. The position was live-in nanny for Elena Vescari, recently widowed, and her 6-year-old son Marco. The estate was private, secured, and located 40 minutes outside the city. The household had staff. The family valued discretion above everything else. The word discretion had appeared in the contract 3 times. Serena had signed anyway. What she had not done, what she had deliberately not done, because sometimes survival requires a specific kind of willful blindness, was research the family name. Vescari. She had heard it before years ago, in a context she had spent 36 months trying to forget. She had told herself it was a common enough name, that the world was full of coincidences, that a woman with a 4-year-old daughter and 60 days of unpaid rent could not afford the luxury of asking too many questions. The cab turned off the main road and onto a private lane lined with old oak trees, their branches heavy and dark against the gray afternoon sky. The gravel crunched beneath the tires. A stone wall appeared on both sides, tall and serious, topped with black iron fencing. Serena felt Arya shift against her shoulder and murmur something in her sleep. The gate was enormous. 2 men in dark clothing stood outside it. Not uniforms, not anything that looked like official security. Just men in dark clothing with the particular stillness of people who had learned to be still in ways that meant something. One of them stepped forward as the cab slowed, and Serena watched him look at the driver, then at her, then at Arya, his face giving away absolutely nothing. He checked something on a tablet, stepped back. The gate opened. Serena exhaled slowly through her nose. The estate appeared at the end of the lane like something out of a film. A long, pale stone building with arched windows and ivy climbing the east wing, surrounded by manicured grounds that stretched further than Serena could see in the fading light. It was the kind of house that didn't announce its wealth loudly. It didn't need to. Every stone of it said, "We have been here a long time, and we will be here long after you are gone." The cab stopped at the front steps. Arya woke up as Serena unclipped her seatbelt, blinking slowly, her dark hair stuck to her cheek. She looked out the window at the house and then looked at her mother with the particular wide-eyed solemnity of a 4-year-old encountering something too large to immediately categorize. "Is this where we live now?" she asked. "For a while," Serena said. "Come on, hold my hand." A woman was waiting at the top of the steps. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, dressed simply in black trousers and a cream blouse that probably cost more than Serena's monthly grocery budget. She had the kind of face that had once been very beautiful and was still striking, but carried something heavy in it, something unresolved, like a room where someone had died and the furniture hadn't been moved yet. "Ms. Vale." Her voice was quieter than Serena expected. "I'm Elena Vescari. Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having us." Serena shook her hand. Elena's grip was firm but brief. Her eyes dropped to Arya, and something shifted in her expression, something soft and pained at the same time. The look of a woman who had recently lost a child's father and was learning to be around children again without flinching. "She's beautiful," Elena said. "Thank you." Serena kept her voice even. "She's also 4, so I apologize in advance for anything that gets broken." Elena almost smiled. "Marco breaks things constantly. They'll get along." She led them inside. The interior of the house was warm and lived in a way Serena hadn't expected. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator in the kitchen, she would discover later. A pair of small, muddy sneakers by the side door. The kind of domestic mess that meant people actually lived somewhere, not just occupied it. The formal rooms, the ones they passed through in that first walk, were beautiful and cold and clearly not used much. But behind them was something human, something imperfect, and Serena allowed herself to relax half a degree. Elena showed her the room she would share with Arya. A suite on the second floor with 2 beds, its own bathroom, windows that looked out over the east garden. It was larger than Serena's entire apartment. Arya immediately ran to the window and pressed her nose against the glass. "There's a fountain," she announced. "There is," Elena agreed. "Does it have fish?" "I honestly don't know. We can check tomorrow." Arya seemed to find this acceptable. She turned around and sat on the edge of the larger bed with the seriousness of a small person conducting an inspection, bouncing once experimentally, then nodding. Serena put down her bag and tried to slow her heartbeat. This was fine. This was a job. She was a professional. She had references and a clean background check, and she was good with children. Genuinely good, not just competent. She could do this. She would keep her head down, earn the money, get ahead of the debt, and in 6 months she would have options she didn't currently have. She could do this. Elena was explaining the household schedule, Marco's school pickup times, his therapy appointments on Thursdays, the evening routine, when Serena became aware of a change in the atmosphere. It was subtle. A shift in the quality of the air, the way a room feels when someone enters it who takes up more space than their body physically requires. She heard a door somewhere in the house, then voices, low, male, speaking quickly in Italian that she didn't understand. Then footsteps on the marble floor of the entrance hall below, decisive and unhurried, the footsteps of someone who had never in their life needed to hurry because the world adjusted its pace to them. Elena stopped mid-sentence. The expression on her face changed. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Awareness. The way a person looks when they hear a sound they recognize and haven't heard in a long time. "He wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow," she said, half to herself. "Who?" Serena started. She didn't finish the question, because the door to the sitting room opened and Adrian Viscari walked in. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had remembered wrong. Maybe she had reduced him in her memory because the truth of him was too large to carry around, and so her mind had quietly scaled him down to something manageable. He was in a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open. He had the build of a man who had spent years in circumstances that required him to be physically capable of violence, even if he had long since graduated to ordering it rather than delivering it himself. Dark hair, slightly longer than professional, a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete. And then he turned, and she saw his eyes. Emerald green. The same emerald green that looked back at Serena every single morning from across the breakfast table. The same emerald green that was currently pressed against the window of this room, attached to a 4-year-old girl who was looking at the fountain and had not yet turned around. The world did not stop. It kept moving. Elena was saying something. One of the men who had followed Adrian in was speaking in a low voice. Somewhere downstairs a phone rang. The world kept moving and Serena's lungs kept working and her heart kept beating, but something at the center of her had gone completely, catastrophically still. Adrian's gaze moved across the room with the automatic efficiency of a man who cataloged everything. Elena. The luggage near the door. Serena. He stopped. She watched it happen, watched the recognition move through him like an electrical current, starting somewhere behind his eyes and traveling through his entire body in under a second, ending in a stillness so complete it was almost frightening. He had not moved. He was not moving. He was simply looking at her with an expression she couldn't read because she had only seen this face in her memory for 3 years, and her memory, it turned out, had been catastrophically inadequate. "Serena," he said. Not a question, Not surprise, exactly. Just her name, spoken in a voice that was lower than she remembered, and steadier than any human being had a right to be in this moment. Adrienne? Her own voice came out even, which was a small miracle, because her hands had gone cold and her mouth tasted like copper. Elena was looking between them. You know each other? Neither of them answered immediately. In the silence, Arya turned away from the window. She did it with the easy, unself-conscious energy of a 4-year-old who had simply seen enough fountain and was ready to redirect her attention. She turned around and saw the tall man in the dark suit standing in the middle of the room, and she did what 4-year-olds do with strangers in their temporary home. She looked at him directly, without guile or caution, with the clear-eyed frankness of someone who hasn't yet learned to pretend not to stare. Adrian Vescari looked at Arya. Serena watched his face in the moment. He looked at his daughter for the first time without knowing she was his daughter, and she would spend a long time afterward trying to find words for what she saw there. It wasn't recognition. Not yet. Not consciously. It was something quieter and more disturbing than recognition. It was the look of a man encountering something familiar in a context where familiar made no sense, like hearing a song in a language you don't speak and knowing, somehow, that you know the words. His eyes on her face. Arya tilted her head. You have green eyes, she said, with the accusatory confidence of a child pointing out a fact. Like mine. The room went very quiet. 3 years earlier, Serena Vale had been 26 years old, recently fired from a graphic design position she'd held for 2 years, and in possession of exactly one friend who owed her a birthday favor. That friend's name was Dana, and the favor had been simple. One night out, no responsibilities, no alarm set for the next morning. Dana had chosen the venue, a rooftop bar in the financial district, the kind of place Serena didn't normally go. Too expensive, too polished, full of people who wore their money quietly in the way that was actually the loudest kind. But it had been her birthday, and Dana had been insistent, and Serena had worn the only dress she owned that cost more than $40, and told herself she was allowed to have one night that felt like a different life. She had been at the bar waiting for her second drink when a man sat down on the stool beside her. He hadn't tried to talk to her immediately. That had been the first thing she noticed. He had ordered a drink, something neat, she didn't catch what, and looked out at the city spread below them with the expression of someone who had been to too many places like this and found them all slightly disappointing. He wasn't performing for anyone. He wasn't scanning the room. He was just present in the contained, self-sufficient way of a man who required nothing from his surroundings. She had looked at him for probably 4 seconds too long. He had noticed. Of course he had noticed. The view's better to the left, he'd said, without turning to look at her. They built that tower in 2019 and it killed the skyline. I keep waiting for someone to take it down. That seems like an extreme reaction to architecture, she'd said. He had turned then, and she had seen his eyes, and her mouth had gone slightly dry. They had talked for 3 hours. Not the way people talked at bars. The tactical, performative conversation of two people deciding whether they want to sleep together while pretending to discuss something else. They had talked the way people talked when they forgot to be strategic. He had asked her about her work and actually listened to the answer. She had asked him about his, and he had told her, without flinching, that he was in what he called management. The particular pause before the word enough of an acknowledgement that the word was carrying more weight than it appeared to. She had understood, in the way you can understand something without having to say it out loud, that his management was the kind conducted at significant remove from ordinary law. She hadn't left. That was the part she had turned over in her mind 1,000 times in the 3 years that followed. She had understood, and she had stayed. She had ordered a third drink, and then a fourth, and when the bar closed, she had gone with him to a hotel 3 blocks away. Not because she was reckless or naive, but because something about this specific man in this specific moment had felt like the last chance for something she couldn't name. In the morning, she had woken before him. She had looked at him sleeping, at the hard angles of his face softened slightly by sleep, at the way he breathed, at the scars she had noticed the night before and not asked about. And she had felt with complete clarity that she needed to leave before he woke up. Not because she was afraid of him, not exactly, because she was afraid of the feeling in her chest, which was already larger and more complicated than one night warranted, and which would become unmanageable if she stayed. She had gathered her clothes. She had written nothing. She had gone. She had never given him her last name. She had found out she was pregnant 6 weeks later. She had tried in the weeks that followed to find him. She didn't have a last name, only a first, Adrian, certain, and a face, and the name of the bar, and nothing else. She had made a limited number of inquiries and received nothing useful. She had told herself she had tried. She had told herself it wasn't her fault. She had mostly believed it, and she had raised Arya alone for 4 years, and she had learned to live with the specific guilt of a woman who knows her daughter has a father somewhere in the world and has been unable to find him, or perhaps in the darkest and most honest corner of her heart had not looked quite hard enough because looking hard enough meant finding him, and finding him meant a conversation she couldn't fully envision surviving. Now she didn't have to envision it anymore. Yeah, you have green eyes, like mine. Arya said it again because she was 4 and she had identified something interesting, and she was not yet aware of the concept of a room that needs to be handled carefully. Adrian Viscari was not a man who showed what he felt. He had been trained by circumstances that had started in childhood and graduated into something organized and deliberate in his 20s to keep his face neutral and his reactions internal. It was a skill he had mastered so completely that most people who worked for him were never entirely certain what he was thinking, and this uncertainty was an operational advantage he had cultivated deliberately. He was not managing it right now, not because his face had broken open. It hadn't. He was still standing with the specific stillness of a man who controlled his body out of long habit. But his eyes were moving. From Arya to Serena and back again, doing the arithmetic, the terrible arithmetic, the kind that doesn't require a calculator and whose answer arrives all at once and cannot be unarrived at. "How old are you?" he asked Arya. His voice was quiet, completely level. Arya held up 4 fingers, then thought about it and added a 5th, which she quickly lowered again. 4, my birthday is in October. Serena watched Adrian's jaw tighten. October. He was doing the math. She could see him doing it. 3 years ago, October would have been 9 months from January when she saw the exact moment the calculation completed, saw it in the fractional tightening around his eyes, the one tell she could detect because she was looking for it and because she had spent one night close enough to this man to learn the geography of his face. "Can you give us a minute?" His voice was still addressed to the room, but his eyes were on Serena. Elena said something in Italian, sharp and questioning. He responded in Italian, 2 short sentences. Elena looked at Serena with an expression that was equal parts apology and warning, then took Arya's hand with a naturalness that Arya accepted immediately. She had always been easy with adults who didn't make sudden movements, and said, "I promised Marco he'd get to show someone the fountain. Would you like to be that someone?" "Does it have fish?" Arya asked. "Let's find out." They left. The room contracted. Adrian Viscari turned to face Serena fully, and she made herself hold his gaze because looking away would be worse. Looking away would be an admission of something she was not ready to admit yet, though she was becoming rapidly aware that her range of options had narrowed dramatically in the last 3 minutes. "Tell me," he said. Just that. 2 words. No preamble, no performance, no attempt to soften the edge of the question. His voice was quiet, but there was something beneath the quiet, not anger yet, or not only anger, something more primary than anger, something with the quality of a structure failing slowly, of weight being applied to a foundation that was not designed to carry it. "She's 4 years old," Serena said. Her voice was steadier than she deserved. "Her name is Arya. She stopped, swallowed. "You can see what she looks like." "I can see what she looks like." His voice did not change. "I asked you to tell me." Serena pressed her fingernails into her palm. "Yes, she's yours." The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough for Serena to understand that this conversation was going to be unlike any conversation she had ever had, and that she had no roadmap for it, and that no amount of preparation, and she had done some, in her head, in the desperate, anxious rehearsals of 3 years, had adequately prepared her for standing in front of Adrian Viscari and saying those words to his face. "You left," he said. "In the morning. You left without—" He stopped himself, reordered. "I looked for you." This she had not expected. You looked for me. For 6 months. He said it flatly, without inflection. The way you state a fact that you have decided to state because it is relevant, not because it is comfortable. I had a first name and a description and nothing else. I looked. Serena felt something loosen in her chest and then immediately tighten again, because this information, while restructuring certain things she had believed about that night and its aftermath, did not actually change anything about the last 4 years. I looked for you too, she said. I found out I was pregnant, and I tried to find you, and I couldn't. You didn't give me a last name. Neither did you. I know. Then we both... He stopped again. She could see the control it was taking. Not to raise his voice, not to step forward, not to release whatever was moving behind his face. You've had her for 4 years. Yes, 4 years. He said it again, as if repetition might alter the weight of it. She is 4 years old, and I did not know she existed until 40 seconds ago. I know. Serena held herself very still. I know that. I'm sorry. Don't! He turned away from her, which was more frightening in a way than when he'd been looking directly at her. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the garden, and she could see the tension across his shoulders, the rigid line of his spine, the effort of a man assembling himself into something that could continue functioning. Don't apologize, not right now. Serena waited. She doesn't know. It wasn't a question. No, she knows her father didn't, that he wasn't part of our lives. She knows I love her. She's a happy child. Serena's voice caught, just slightly, the first crack in the evenness she had been maintaining by pure force. She's extraordinary. She reads already. She builds things, like structures. She takes apart toys to see how they work. Stop. His voice was not cruel. It was just a man trying to put a limit on the amount of things he was being required to absorb at once. Just stop. For a minute. She stopped. He stood at the window for a long time. Long enough that the afternoon light shifted slightly, and somewhere outside she could hear, distantly, the sound of children's voices. Arya's higher and more insistent. Another voice that was probably Marco's. The sound of running on gravel. When Adrian turned back around, his face had settled into something composed and unreadable, which she recognized from before as the face he wore when he was operational, when he had converted feeling into function, when he was thinking instead of being. It was a colder face than the one she had seen for those 3 hours at the bar, and she missed that face suddenly with a vividness that surprised her. You're here as Elena's nanny, he said. Yes. You didn't know this was my estate. It was almost a question. Almost. I didn't let myself know, she said, because she was too tired for any version of this that involved lying, and because he was the kind of man who would find a lie anyway, and because some part of her had known, and had come anyway, had been pulled here by some gravity she couldn't fully account for and wasn't ready to examine. He was looking at her very carefully. What does that mean? It means I heard your family name and I didn't ask questions I could have asked. More silence. Then, why? She looked at him directly. Because I needed the job. Because I had no other options. Because I've been carrying this alone for 4 years, and... She stopped herself before the sentence finished itself into something too exposed. Because I needed the job. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away again, and she had the sense of something in him deciding. Not the decision itself, just the act of deciding, the moment before the choice crystallizes. You'll stay, he said. The position has nothing to do with this. He moved toward the door, and she recognized the movement as the end of the conversation. Not because the conversation was over, but because he had reached the limit of what he could contain right now and was removing himself from the room before he exceeded it. We'll talk again. Tonight. After Arya is asleep. He reached the doorway. Adrian. She said his name before she had decided to. He stopped. Did not turn around fully. Just enough. She is... Serena's throat tightened. You're going to want to know her, and she's going to want to know who you are. She's been asking me questions for over a year, and I've been... Another stop. She steadied herself. I just need you to understand that whatever you're feeling right now, however angry you are, she is 4 years old, and she is extraordinary, and she deserves... I heard you, he said. His voice was very quiet. I heard what you said about her. He walked out. Serena stood alone in the room and realized her hands were shaking. Dinner was a performance that both of them delivered with professional competence, and neither of them felt remotely. Elena had arranged things in the way that people who are good at managing households arrange things when a situation has gone sideways. She had positioned Arya next to Marco, which gave the children something to do with each other and gave the adults a reason not to talk directly. She had chosen a simple meal. She had instructed the staff to serve and disappear. Arya and Marco had apparently formed an immediate and intense alliance over the fountain, which did contain fish. 3 of them, fat and orange, which Arya had named before anyone could stop her. The names were, in order, Bread, Tuesday, and Frank. Marco had accepted these names with the solemnity of a 6-year-old who recognizes a higher authority on matters of fish. Arya ate her dinner and told Marco about the apartment and the diner where her mother used to work, and the park near their building, with the broken slide that no one ever fixed. She was not self-conscious about any of this. She reported the facts of her life the way a journalist reports from the field, with clarity, without commentary, without any apparent awareness that the information might land differently on different listeners. Adrian sat at the head of the table and ate his food and said approximately 11 words during the entire meal, all of them addressed to Elena or Marco, and none of them requiring more than a word or two in response. He did not look at Arya directly. He looked at her the way a person looks at a very bright light, peripherally, carefully, in sustained brief glances that never quite became stares. Serena watched him do it. She watched him notice the way Arya held her fork, with the slightly awkward grip of a child who had taught herself and developed her own technique. She watched him notice the way Arya's face moved when she was interested in something, the slight forward lean, the focused stillness that was so different from Marco's constant motion. She watched him notice the eyes. She watched him notice the eyes and look away and come back to them and look away again. After dinner, she took Arya upstairs and ran the bath and went through the routine that she had performed 1,100 times in 4 years. The washing, the story, the specific sequence of small negotiations about whether the light should be all the way off or just mostly off, the particular stuffed rabbit without which sleep was a non-starter, the final glass of water that was always remembered at the moment of departure. Arya, in the bathtub, said, "The man has my eyes." Serena continued washing her daughter's hair. "Lots of people have green eyes," she said. "Not like mine." Arya was certain about this. She was certain about most things. "Mine are this color." She pointed to her own iris, though she was in the bath and couldn't see it. "His are that same color. It's not regular green. It's like—" She searched for the word with the seriousness of someone for whom language was important. "Like when leaves are new, in spring, before they get dark." Serena's chest hurt. "He's a nice man." "I don't know him," Serena said. "You just met him." "He looked at me sad." Arya tipped her head back obediently to have the shampoo rinsed. "Like when you look at pictures of Grandma sometimes. That's sad." Serena did not say anything. "Why is he sad?" "I don't know, baby." "Is it because of me?" Serena stilled, then finished rinsing, then wrapped Arya in the large white towel and held her for a moment, this small person who already understood too much about the emotional temperatures of rooms she walked into, who had been reading adult faces since before she had words for what she was reading. "No," she said. "It's not because of you. Nothing sad is ever because of you, okay?" Arya considered this. "Okay," she said, with the particular tone of a child accepting an answer while reserving the right to return to the question later. He was waiting in his library on the ground floor. The room was large and underlit, the kind of space that accumulated shadows in its corners, full of books that looked genuinely read rather than decorative, spines cracked, some with paper markers visible. He had a glass of something on the table beside the chair he was sitting in but hadn't touched it. When Serena came in, he stood. Old habit or something else. She wasn't sure. "She's asleep?" he asked. "She goes down fast when she's had a big day." He nodded, sat back down. Serena sat in the chair across from him, and they looked at each other across a coffee table that held his untouched drink and a lamp that was making the only significant light in the room. "Tell me about her," he said. From the beginning, everything. She talked for over an hour. She hadn't expected to. She had come prepared for negotiation, for a measured exchange of information, for a conversation with clear boundaries. But he asked questions. Good questions, specific questions, questions that didn't let her summarize when detail was possible. He asked about the pregnancy, the delivery, the first year. He asked about milestones she hadn't expected him to care about. When Arya had first walked, first talked, what her first word had been, what she was afraid of, what she loved. He didn't interrupt. He didn't soften his face into the kind of performed sympathy people offer when they want you to feel heard without actually listening. He simply listened, with the focused attention of a man who had learned that information was currency and that insufficient data was the most dangerous condition possible. But it wasn't operational. She could tell it wasn't operational. His hands, folded in his lap, were too still. His jaw was too tight. He was holding this very carefully, this information, the way you hold something fragile that you know you are not supposed to drop. When she finished, the room was quiet. She named the fish bread Tuesday, and Frank, he said. Serena almost laughed. She has a system. I've never understood it. Something moved across his face, just briefly. Something that was not quite a smile but came from the same family. Then it was gone. I need to understand something. His voice had changed, lower, more direct, the operational face back in place. You came here, to this house, carrying that information. Yes. That took... He stopped. That was either very brave or very reckless. Probably both, she admitted. Why didn't you tell the agency? Tell them who I was, that there was a connection. They would have redirected you. Because I needed the job, she said again. And then, because the late hour and the lamp and the way he was looking at her had worn down some of the armoring. And because I've been carrying this alone for 4 years, and I think some part of me was tired of it, of being the only one who knew. The silence after that was different from the earlier silences. Heavier, more honest. Adrian picked up his drink and held it without drinking. I have to tell you something. Okay, this family... He set the glass down without drinking from it. What we are, what I run. I have never wanted... He stopped, restructured. I have spent years making certain decisions specifically so that children could not be used against me. So there was no one that people could reach to get to me. You understand what I'm saying? Serena felt cold. Yes, Arya's existence. He said her name for the first time, and she watched the effort it took, the way the name changed the texture of the sentence. Now that it's known, Elena knows, and within the hour my capos will know because that is how this works, there are implications. Security implications. For her. Are you telling me she's in danger? I'm telling you she's the daughter of a man with a very specific kind of enemies. His voice was even. I'm also telling you that this estate is the safest place in the region, and that I would... He stopped. Hard stop. Then, that nothing will happen to her. That is not a promise I make. It is a statement of fact. Serena looked at him across the lamplit room. I believe you, she said. She wasn't sure when she had decided that, or whether deciding it was wise. She only knew it was true. They didn't speak for a while. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 10. She said something, Adrian said, looking at the floor. In the bath. You were in there. Did she say anything about... He stopped himself. She said you looked at her sad. Serena kept her voice gentle. She said it was like the way I look at pictures of my mother. His jaw worked. She's perceptive, he said. She always has been. Another silence. He stood. The conversation was ending. She could feel it, the way a room cools when a window is opened. He moved to the bookshelf and stood with his back to her, one hand on the shelf, not looking at the books. Tomorrow, he said, I'd like... He didn't finish. I know, Serena said quietly. We'll need to... I know. He turned slightly, not fully. Does she... He stopped for the third time, and this was the most telling stop, because it was the first one that sounded like a man who had lost the architecture of the sentence he was trying to build. Does she have everything she needs? The question was so much smaller than all the other questions, and so much larger. She has everything, Serena said. She has always had everything that matters. He nodded, still not quite facing her. Good, he said. He walked toward the door, and Serena sat in the chair in the lamplight and listened to his footsteps fade down the hall. And she thought about a morning 3 years ago when she had stood at the window of a hotel room in the early light and looked at a sleeping man and made a decision she had never stopped reconsidering. She picked up the glass he had never touched and held it, and thought, this is not the end of something. This is the beginning of something that has no roadmap and no guaranteed exit, and the most terrifying potential of anything she has ever walked into. She set the glass down. Upstairs, in the room with 2 beds and the window overlooking the fountain, Arya was sleeping, dreaming of fish named Bread and Tuesday and Frank. And in his office at the far end of the East Wing, Adrian Vescari was sitting behind his desk with a security briefing he was not reading, staring at the wall, trying to reassemble the structure of a life that had just been fundamentally altered. Neither of them knew yet about the man sitting in a parked car 3 blocks from the estate's north entrance, or about the photographs on the seat beside him, or about the phone call he was about to make to someone who would pay very well for the information that Adrian Vescari's unknown daughter had just walked through his front gate. The photographs were 8 by 10 printed on glossy paper, the kind of resolution that meant a decent camera and a telephoto lens and someone who knew how to use both. They showed the front gate of the Vescari estate, the cab arriving, a woman stepping out with a child on her hip. The child's face was partially obscured in the first shot, clear in the second, and in the third, taken at the moment Serena had paused on the front steps to shift Arya's weight, completely visible. The man in the parked car had a name, Dossie. He worked for a man named Caruso, who ran distribution networks in the southern part of the city and had been in a slow, grinding territorial dispute with the Vescari organization for 14 months. The dispute had not yet become violent in any way that required public acknowledgement. It was the kind of conflict conducted in the language of delayed shipments and rerouted contracts and intermediaries who stopped returning calls. Professional, managed, deeply hostile beneath the surface management. Dossie sent the photographs at 10:47 p.m. The accompanying message was brief. New arrivals, woman and child. Child has his eyes. Confirm and advise. He received a response in under 4 minutes. Confirm. Sit on it. Do not move. Bum. Adrian found out about the car at 6:14 the following morning. He was in his office when Luca came in. Luca Ferrante, 38 years old, his head of security for 6 years, a man whose primary professional skill was delivering bad news without flinching. He set a printed photograph on the desk without preamble. Adrian looked at it, looked at Luca. How long? We flagged the vehicle at 9 p.m. It moved at 11:30. Different car in the same position by 1 a.m. We ran plates on both. Caruso. His people. Yes. Adrian picked up the photograph. It was a shot taken from outside the gate looking in, one of his own security cameras, Luca showing him what the opposition had seen. The image showed Serena on the front steps with Arya on her hip. From this angle, this distance, there was nothing ambiguous about the child's eyes. He set the photograph down. Who else has seen this? On our side. Me, Ricci, and now you. Luca's voice was neutral. On their side, but unknown. Dossie's a relay. He sends up, he doesn't analyze. Caruso. Almost certainly. Adrian stood, moved to the window. The garden below was pale in the early morning light. The fountain still. The grounds empty. He had not slept. He had sat at this desk for most of the night with a security briefing and a glass of scotch, and the specific numb quality of a man whose internal landscape had been restructured so completely that he was still waiting to understand what the new architecture looked like. Increase the perimeter, he said. I want a second rotation on the north and east gates. Rotate the vehicle positions. They've mapped our patterns if they were there from 9 p.m. Already moving on it. The woman and child are to have a shadow at all times when they're outside the main building. Discreet, not visible to them. Luca paused. Fractional. Confirmed relationship? The question was professional. Luca asked it the way a surgeon asks about allergies, not because he was uncertain of the answer, but because he needed it confirmed for the record. Confirmed? Adrian said. Luca nodded, made a note. And the staff? A household this size? Full audit. Everyone. He turned from the window. Start with anyone hired in the last 8 months. Cross-reference with any names that have appeared in Caruso's known network. That'll take 48 hours. Then start now. Luca left. Adrian stood in the empty office and looked at the photograph on his desk. At Serena's profile, the line of her jaw tense. The way she was holding Arya, not just carrying her, but bracing her. The grip of a woman who had spent 4 years being the only thing standing between this child and a world that did not arrange itself carefully around small people. He thought about a 4-year-old who named Fishbread Tuesday and Frank. He thought about the man in the parked car with his camera and his phone and his message to Caruso. Then he went to find Serena. She was in the kitchen. She had woken early. The unfamiliar house, the unfamiliar sounds, the weight of yesterday sitting on her chest before she was fully conscious, and had come down to find coffee before the household fully activated. She was standing at the counter in jeans and a gray sweater, hands wrapped around a mug, looking out the kitchen window at the garden with the expression of someone conducting a private inventory of things they cannot fix. She heard him come in and turned. His face told her something was wrong before he opened his mouth. Not panic. This was not a man who wore panic, but there was a compression to him, a tightening of the operational mask that she was already learning to read as the face he put on when the situation required management rather than response. There was a car outside the gate last night, he said. He put the photograph on the counter between them. Serena looked at it. The mug stayed in her hands, but she wasn't holding it anymore. She was just in contact with it, her fingers cold. She looked at the image for a long time, at herself, at Arya's face, clear and bright and utterly identifiable. Who? She asked. Competition. Someone who has been looking for leverage against me for a while. He kept his voice flat. They have this image, possibly more. Does that mean... She stopped. Rebuilt. Is she in danger? Not immediately. They're not at that stage. He watched her face. But this changes the security calculus. I need you to understand what that means. Tell me what it means. It means she doesn't go outside the main structure without escort. It means no trips off the property until I've assessed the situation. It means... He paused, choosing his words with the precision of a man who knew that imprecise words in this context would cost him. It means your life becomes more restricted than you signed up for. And I am telling you that directly, rather than presenting it as something else. Serena set the mug down, turned to face him fully. You're telling me my daughter is being watched by your enemies. I'm telling you she may have been photographed by someone working for my enemies. There is a difference. Not to me. Serena, don't. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that stopped him. Don't manage me. I'm not your staff. I'm not someone you can brief and dismiss. Tell me the actual truth of what this situation is. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair from the kitchen table and sat down, which she hadn't expected. He had been standing in the posture of a man who was ready to leave, and the act of sitting was a concession of some kind. The actual truth, he said, is that my organization is in the middle of a territorial dispute with a competitor who has been patient and strategic for over a year. He has been looking for something he can use, not necessarily to make a move, but to gain position. The existence of a child connected to me is information with value. He met her eyes. He won't move against her, not directly, not right now. The risk-reward doesn't serve him, but he will use this information as leverage. He will find ways to make my attention divide. And a divided enemy is a weakened enemy. Serena absorbed this. So she becomes a piece in your game. She was always a piece in my game. The moment she was born with my eyes in a world where I exist, that was true. His voice was not cold, and it was exact. There was a difference. I did not make that choice. It was made for us. What I can control is the protective response. And the protective response is she doesn't leave the house. For now. Until I've dealt with the situation. How long is for now? I don't know. Serena pulled out the opposite chair and sat down too. They were across the table from each other, the photograph between them, the morning light starting to come properly through the windows. She's going to ask questions, Serena said. She already is. She mentioned you twice this morning before I even got her fully dressed. Something crossed his face. What did she say? She asked if the man with her eyes was going to eat breakfast with us. The silence after that had a specific texture. What did you tell her? I said I didn't know. Serena looked at him directly. I need to know what you want to tell her, about who you are. I'm not going to handle this without your input. She deserves better than a story I made up alone. But I also need to know where you stand before I can help her understand anything. Adrian looked at the photograph on the table between them. I want to know her, he said. It came out simpler than she thought he intended, stripped of the operational casing. He stopped. Something worked in his jaw. I've been deliberate about not having things that could be taken from me, for very specific reasons that have to do with the nature of what I do. He looked up from the photograph. And now I'm looking at a picture of a 4-year-old who named fish after days of the week and bread, and I don't... He stopped again, looked away. I don't know how to do this. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. Neither do I, she said, but she doesn't need us to know how. She just needs us to not lie to her. Breakfast happened. It happened the way significant things often happen. Not with ceremony, not with the weight it deserved, but through the mechanism of ordinary life proceeding despite everything. Arya came downstairs holding her stuffed rabbit and found Marco already at the table demanding confirmation that Frank the fish had survived the night, and the two of them immediately fell into an argument about whether fish slept, which Elena refereed with the patience of a woman running on no sleep herself. Adrian came to the table. He sat down. Not at the head, he left that to Elena, some unspoken concession to the domestic domain being hers, but at the side, across from Marco, which put him 2 seats from Arya. Arya looked at him, put a piece of toast in her mouth, continued looking at him. He met her gaze. Did you sleep okay? He asked. Arya chewed, swallowed. There were sounds. What kind of sounds? Big house sounds. Our apartment was small. Small houses are louder because there's less space for the sound to go. She said this with complete confidence, as though she had worked out the acoustics independently and was delivering findings. Big houses swallow the sounds. Adrian seemed to consider this. That's an accurate description. I know. Arya picked up another piece of toast. Are you Elena's brother? I am. Marco's uncle. Yes. She processed this, then, what's your name? You didn't say last night. Adrian. Adrian. She tried it. I'm Arya. I know. We have the same letter at the start. He looked at her. We do. And the same eyes. She said it the same way she'd said it the night before, not as an observation loaded with meaning, just as a fact she had identified and was choosing to revisit. Why do we have the same eyes? The table went very still. Elena picked up her coffee cup. Marco was looking at his eggs. Serena, across the table, felt the question land like a stone into water and watched the ripples move outward and did not breathe. Adrian looked at Arya for a moment, at this small person looking back at him with frank, uncomplicated curiosity, no agenda, no awareness of what she was actually asking. Sometimes people share things, he said, features, colors. His voice was very even. Families, especially. Arya considered this. Are we family? He held her gaze. I think, he said carefully, that we might be figuring that out. Arya seemed to find this answer sufficient. She turned back to her toast. Okay, she said. Can I see the fish after breakfast? You can see the fish, Elena said quickly. Marco erupted into a detailed plan involving the feeding schedule and the relative personalities of Bread, Tuesday, and Frank, and the conversation moved on with the terrible normalcy of ordinary morning, and Serena allowed herself one full breath, and across the table Adrian Vescari was looking at his daughter's profile with an expression she had no name for, something vast and unguarded that he was not quite managing to contain. The first real detonation came at 11 a.m. Serena heard it from the hallway, raised voices from the direction of Adrian's office, the kind of volume that meant someone had decided to stop being professional. She had been heading to Elena's sitting room for their morning briefing, and she stopped, because the voice she was hearing wasn't one she recognized, and the quality of it, sharp, contemptuous, carried on the edge of something deliberately designed to wound, made her slow down before she processed the words. She caught fragments, Italian mixed with English, the way people argue when they're angry enough to stop filtering themselves. Brought them here without telling anyone. A nanny, Adrian, she is the help. How do we know? Then Adrian's voice, much lower, much more controlled, which was somehow more frightening than the raised voices. Say that again. Silence. I said, say it again. She moved past the door. She didn't want to hear more, not because she wasn't affected by it, but because standing in a hallway processing the fact that someone in this house had just described her as help in a tone that meant something much colder. She felt the particular humiliation of a woman who had walked into a situation she understood intellectually, but was only now understanding in her body. Elena found her in the garden, 20 minutes later. Serena was sitting on a stone bench near the fountain, watching Arya and Marco argue over who got to control the fish-feeding pellets, and she had the specific stillness of a woman doing a very convincing impression of being fine. Elena sat beside her without asking permission. That was Enzo, she said. My husband's younger brother. He manages 2 of Adrian's shipping accounts. You don't need to explain. I know I don't. Elena folded her hands in her lap. But I want you to understand something about this family. Every person in it has a position, a function, a defined place in a structure. Enzo has been in his position for 11 years. He has a very specific understanding of how the hierarchy operates and what threatens it. Serena watched Arya successfully wrestle the pellet container from Marco and begin distributing them with great ceremony. And I threaten it. Arya does. Elena's voice was quiet. An unknown heir, a child whose existence Adrian didn't know about, which means his information network failed. A child whose mother is the help. Elena paused. A woman he spent one night with 3 years ago who has appeared with a child in a convenient timing and no documentation of... She stopped herself. I don't believe any of that. I want to be clear. But Enzo does. Enzo believes in threats until they're neutralized. It's what makes him useful. Elena turned to look at her. It's also what makes him dangerous. He will go to the capos before Adrian has a chance to manage the narrative. Is that... Serena turned too. Is that bad? The capos have a very specific view of what constitutes a liability. Elena's eyes were steady. A woman with a child who may or may not be Adrian's, who appeared without warning, who has a security implication already. On day 2, she let the sentence complete itself in the air between them. They will pressure him to make a decision quickly and clearly. What kind of decision? Elena looked at her for a long moment. The kind that either legitimizes you completely, she said, or removes you from the equation. Serena looked back at the fountain, at Arya, who had finished feeding the fish and was now lying on her stomach at the edge of the fountain wall, face 6 inches from the water, apparently engaged in direct communication with Frank. He won't do that, Serena said. Remove us. No, Elena agreed. He won't. She paused. That's actually the problem. Enzo Viscari was 41 years old, lean and dark-haired in the way that the Viscari men all were, with eyes that were brown instead of green and a mouth that sat in a permanent expression of controlled skepticism. He found Serena at 2 p.m. in the hallway outside the kitchen, and he approached her with the deliberateness of a man who had decided on a conversation and was not asking permission to have it. Ms. Vale. He stopped 3 feet from her. Professional distance. A word. I have somewhere to be. This won't take long. She stopped, turned, looked at him. Enzo had the kind of face that was used to being the most dangerous thing in a room and was adjusting, visibly, to the fact that she wasn't impressed by it. He studied her for a moment, the kind of looking over that was intended to be noticed, to establish a certain order of things. You should know, he said, that Adrian is a man with obligations that supersede personal sentiment. Whatever you believe this situation to be, whatever he has implied about his intentions, the organization will not accommodate a liability. I'm not a liability. Your presence here has already attracted surveillance from a competitor. In 48 hours. His voice was measured. That is the definition of a liability. My presence here didn't attract anything. She kept her voice even. My daughter's face attracted it. That face exists because of Adrian. You want to talk about liabilities? Start with the man who created one and didn't know about it. Enzo's eyes sharpened, just slightly. You have no idea what you've walked into, he said. Then explain it to me. She held his gaze. Or back up. The silence between them had the quality of two people taking each other's measure and coming to conclusions that neither fully liked. My brother can protect you, Enzo said finally. For now. But protection in this world is not unconditional. It has a cost, and the cost is compliance. You will find that the men who run this organization have limited patience for disruptions to operational stability, regardless of what personal claims you believe you have on Adrian's attention. I don't have claims on his attention, Serena said. My daughter has claims on her father. That's different. Is it? Not a question. Yes, she said. It is. Enzo looked at her for another moment. Then he adjusted his jacket, the minute straightening of a man wrapping his composure back around him like a coat. Be careful, Ms. Vale, he said, about the stories you tell yourself, about what this is, about what it can become. He walked away. Serena stood in the hallway and made herself breathe slowly, in and out, until her hands stopped feeling the need to shake. She found Adrian in the library at 4 p.m. He was on a call, pacing, speaking in Italian, the conversation clearly reaching its conclusion as she pushed the door open. He looked at her, held up one finger, finished the call. Enzo spoke to you, he said. It wasn't a question. In the hallway. Yes. What did he say? She told him, accurately, without editorializing, the way she'd learned to deliver information when she worked in an office full of people waiting for an excuse to dismiss her. She watched Adrian's face move through several controlled reactions, the jaw, the eyes, the particular compression around his mouth, that she was beginning to understand as suppressed anger reaching a decision point. I'll deal with Enzo, he said. I don't need you to deal with Enzo. She faced him square. I need to know if what he said is true, not the threat. I understood the threat. The other part, about whether protection has conditions. Adrian looked at her. What conditions are you asking about specifically? He implied that the capos will pressure you to make a decision about us quickly. She kept her voice level. I want to know if that's real. And if it is, I want to know what decisions are on the table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to the chair and sat, and she remained standing, and the lamplight between them was the same as last night and entirely different. The capos will have opinions, he said. They always have opinions. About instability, about exposure, about anything that reads as a complication. He laced his hands together. They are not wrong that your arrival, and specifically Arya's, creates a complication. What does that mean for us? It means I have a choice to make faster than I would prefer. What choice? He looked up at her, direct, no performance. I can acknowledge her publicly, as my daughter, formally, with the weight of my name behind it. That elevates her from exposure to protected status. It tells everyone in this world, including Caruso, that she is not a weakness to exploit, but a line not to cross. He paused. Or I can... He stopped. Something moved across his face. There is no other option I'm willing to consider. Serena felt her breath catch. You're talking about claiming her. I'm talking about being her father. His voice went rough at the edges, just slightly, the first roughness she'd heard in it. Which I am. Regardless of what the capos think or what Enzo says or what any of this costs me, I am her father. The words landed in the room and stayed there. You've known her for 1 day, Serena said, quietly. Not a challenge, just the truth of it, laid down carefully. I know. He held her gaze. I also know that the alternative is a world where she is an unknown asset to people who will use her to get to me, and I will not... The roughness again, more pronounced. I will not allow that world to exist. Serena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Enzo in the hallway, about Luca and his photographs, about the man in the parked car, and the telephoto lens and the message sent to a man named Caruso. She thought about Arya on her stomach at the fountain, talking to a fish named Frank. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again. Then we figure out how to tell her. They told her that evening. Not the full truth. Not yet. Not all at once. Not in the way that would require a 4-year-old to restructure everything she understood about herself before bed. But enough. They sat in the garden near the fountain as the light went gold and slow, Arya between them on the bench with her rabbit in her lap. And Adrian had said, with the careful evenness of a man who had prepared his words and was delivering them as steadily as he could manage, "Arya, I need to tell you something important. A long time ago, before you were born, your mom and I knew each other. And the reason you have green eyes like mine is because—" He had paused, looked at Serena, looked back at Arya. "Because I'm your dad." Arya had been still for a very long time. Then she had looked at her rabbit. Then at the fountain. Then at Adrian, with the clear, grave eyes that were the same shape and color as his. "You've been here the whole time?" she asked. "No." His voice had gone very quiet. "I didn't know about you. We couldn't find each other." "Oh." She had processed this. "But you know now." "I know now." Another silence. Arya had looked at the fountain. "Frank the fish didn't have a dad either," she said finally. "He just had bread and Tuesday." Adrian had looked at his daughter for a moment that Serena would never entirely be able to describe. The look of a man who had spent his entire life building things that could not feel, and was looking at the first living thing he had made without trying and finding it completely undone him. "Frank has us now," he said. Arya had seemed to decide this was satisfactory. She had slid off the bench and gone to look at the fountain, and Adrian had sat with his hands on his knees and said nothing. And Serena had sat beside him and said nothing either, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already holding. 3 feet away, Arya was telling Frank about the development. It was the most peaceful moment of the last 48 hours. It lasted exactly until Serena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at it. Unknown number. No area code. A single message. "We know who she is. Be smart about what comes next." She looked up. Found Adrian already watching her. He had seen her face change. She turned the phone and showed him the message without speaking. He read it. His face went completely still. And in that stillness, Serena understood for the first time, not intellectually, not as an abstraction about the world he occupied, but in her chest, in her gut, with the physical certainty of someone standing at the edge of something that goes very far down. That there was no version of what came next that was simple or safe or without cost. Arya turned from the fountain. "Dad," she said. It was the first time she had used the word. Adrian looked at his daughter and the phone in Serena's hand and the last of the golden light going out of the garden sky, and his jaw set with the particular hardness of a man who has just understood that the war he thought he was managing has— The word came out of Arya's mouth the way first words always do, without ceremony, without awareness of their own weight, just a small person using the most accurate available label for a thing she had decided was real. "Dad." Adrian did not move. The phone was still in Serena's hand between them, the message glowing on the screen. "We know who she is. Be smart about what comes next." And Adrian was looking at his daughter, and the word was still in the air, settling, and his face was doing something Serena had no name for, something that was past the operational mask entirely, something that lived beneath every defense he had ever built. Arya was already turning back to the fountain. She had used the word the way she used all words, accurately, efficiently, and without requiring a response. She had decided something and labeled it and moved on. She was talking to Frank again. Adrian looked at Serena. She showed him the phone screen again, though he had already read it. He took it from her hand, gently, which surprised her, and read it a second time. Then he looked at the garden around them with the automatic sweep of a man reassessing his environment, clocking the sight lines, the shadows, the distance to the nearest gate. "Inside," he said quietly. "Now." "Arya." "Bring her." Serena stood and crossed to the fountain. She put her hand on Arya's shoulder, felt the small warmth of her, the aliveness of her, and said in the most ordinary voice she could manufacture, "Come on, Bug, time to go in. Frank needs more pellets. Frank has had enough pellets. He doesn't look satisfied. Fish never look satisfied. That's their whole thing." She lifted Arya from the fountain edge and settled her on her hip, and Arya went without real resistance, trailing her rabbit, already cataloging something new through the kitchen window. Serena followed Adrian inside without looking back at the garden and tried to calculate, in the 30 seconds it took to walk from the fountain to the kitchen door, how frightened she was allowed to be in front of her daughter. The answer was not at all. Mom. Luca was in the kitchen when they came inside, which meant Adrian had already sent a signal Serena hadn't seen. The two men exchanged a look. 4 seconds, no words, and Luca held out his hand for the phone. Adrian gave it to him. "Trace it," Adrian said. "Already moving." Luca looked at the screen. "Burner, but the send point," he was typing as he talked, "might be enough." Elena appeared in his doorway, assessed the atmosphere in the room with the speed of a woman raised in this world, and said to Arya with perfect naturalness, "Marco found something in the upstairs playroom. He needs a second opinion, and he specifically requested yours." Arya looked at her mother. "Go," Serena said. "I'll come up in a minute." Arya went, trailing rabbit, already asking Elena what kind of something. The kitchen contracted. "How did they get her number?" Adrian's voice was directed at Luca. "She's in the agency system," Luca said without looking up from the phone. "Employment records, contact information. If Caruso has a line into municipal databases, he has a line into everything." Adrian's voice was flat. "Find the send point, and I want to know who on our staff has had contact with Caruso's network in the last 6 months. Full audit, I said this morning. Accelerate it." "Already accelerated." "Further." Luca left the kitchen without another word. Adrian turned to Serena. She was standing with her back against the counter, arms crossed, maintaining the posture of a woman who was not going to fall apart in a kitchen. Not because she wasn't entitled to it, but because falling apart was a luxury she had never been able to afford and wasn't about to start now. "I need you to stay in the East Wing tonight," he said. "You and Arya. Don't use any exterior-facing rooms." "You think they're watching the house?" "I think they've been watching the house." He moved to the window and looked out without standing in front of it. Standing to the side, the habit of a man who had learned the geometry of exposure. "The message was informational. They want me to know they have eyes on you. It's a pressure tactic." "Is it working?" He turned his head to look at her. Something moved behind his eyes. "Yes." She absorbed this. "What do they want?" "Territory. Specifically, 3 distribution corridors in the Eastern Port District that have been contested for 14 months. His voice was operational again. The briefing voice, clean and stripped of effect. "Caruso has been patient because patience serves him. He's not going to make an aggressive move against a 4-year-old child. That's not the play. The exposure alone would..." He stopped. "That's not the play. But he will use the information to force concessions. He will use the fact that she exists and that I am now publicly connected to her to create leverage at the negotiating table. Or Seki Iapad. So she becomes a bargaining chip. Only if I let her." His voice hardened on the last 3 words. "Which I won't." Serena looked at him. "Then what do you do?" "I move first. I go to the table before he can set it." He turned fully from the window. "Tomorrow morning, I have a meeting with my senior capos. I had already scheduled it. The Caruso situation has been building, but now the agenda is different. I formally acknowledge Arya. I announce it as a choice, not a revelation. I control the frame. And if the capos don't like the frame, they'll like it less if Caruso announces it first." He said it with the absolute certainty of a man who had been playing this particular game for a long time. Status in this world is narrated, not just held. Whoever tells the story first tells it. Serena nodded slowly. She understood the logic. She had worked in offices, had navigated institutional politics, had learned early that the person who frames the problem owns the solution. This was the same principle, amplified by stakes she was still calibrating. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask. When you go into that meeting tomorrow and you announce that Arya is your daughter, when you make her part of your official world..." She kept her eyes on his face. "Can you undo that? Later. If things don't..." She couldn't find the right articulation. "Is there a version of this where she grows up away from all of it? Normal school, normal life, no one in parked cars with cameras?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. The word landed simply. without apology or ornamentation. Once I acknowledge her, she carries my name in this world. The protection that comes with that name is real and total. The exposure that comes with it is also real and total. He held her gaze. I cannot give her the name and take back the world that comes with it. That is not how any of this works. Serena looked at the counter, at her own hands. Then make sure, she said, before tomorrow. Make sure you want this, because I can take her and leave tonight, and you can say we were never here, and Caruso has photographs of a woman and a child he cannot definitively prove are connected to you. She looked up. I'm giving you the exit, if you want it, because once you walk into that meeting, there is no version of this I can protect her from. Adrian looked at her for a long time. I called her Dad, he said. She called me Dad, 6 hours after meeting me. His voice was very quiet. There is no exit. She didn't sleep. She lay in the room with the two beds, listening to Arya breathe in the other bed, the deep and fearless sleep of a child who had acquired a father that afternoon and found this development adequately satisfying, and Serena stared at the ceiling and ran numbers she couldn't make add up. At some point near 3 a.m., she heard movement in the hall. Not alarming, just the house being awake, the specific quality of a building where some people never fully slept. She got up and went to the window and looked out at the dark garden and the fountain and the black iron of the far gate, and she thought about the message on her phone and the man named Caruso and the corridors that were being negotiated over. And she thought, I walked into this. I had the option to not walk into this, and I walked into it anyway. She also thought, Arya said the word like she'd been saving it. She went back to bed. The capos arrived at 9 a.m. There were 4 of them. Serena saw them from the upstairs hallway window as the cars pulled through the gate. Dark sedans, men in dark clothing, the particular efficiency of people who moved in formation without being asked. She recognized none of them. She didn't need to. The weight of them was apparent from 50 feet away, the weight of men who ran things. Luca positioned himself outside the meeting room door at 9:05. Elena took Arya and Marco to the far end of the estate, to the playroom and the garden on the west side, away from the meeting rooms, a geography designed to render the children invisible and the women managed. Serena went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat down and waited. At 11:15, the door to Adrian's office opened. At 11:17, she heard the voice she recognized as Enzo's, sharp and fast, and then Adrian's, one long sentence in Italian, and then silence, and then the sound of chairs. At 11:30, the cars left. Adrian came to the kitchen. He looked like a man who had spent 2 hours not losing an argument only through the exercise of considerable structural authority. His face was composed, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been as visible yesterday, and he moved with the slight heaviness of someone carrying additional weight on the inside. He sat down across from her. It's done, he said. Arya is formally acknowledged. The capos have been informed. By tonight, everyone in this organization will know. How did they take it? How people always take things they didn't choose. He accepted the coffee she pushed toward him. They adjusted. And Enzo? A pause. Enzo will require more time. Serena looked at him. That's not the whole answer. No. He drank, set the cup down. Enzo made a proposal that we establish a formal arrangement, a legal one, documented, that establishes paternity and your status within the household in terms the organization can recognize and work with. He kept his voice neutral. An engagement. The kitchen was very quiet. He proposed that you proposed to me, Serena said. He proposed a strategic formalization. Yes. Those are very different things. I know. She looked at him directly. And what did you say? I said I would handle my personal life without a committee. His voice was final on this. What I'm telling you now is that the information will move. It moves fast in this world, and with it moves a certain kind of attention, from Caruso, from other interested parties, from people who will try to assess whether Arya is a protected asset or a point of access. He met her eyes. I want you to have a security detail, visible to you, not to her. You want me to have a bodyguard. I want you to have someone between you and anything that moves wrong. Serena thought about the message on her phone, thought about the photograph of herself and Arya on the front steps. Okay, she said. He nodded. Something in him settled very slightly. "There's one more thing," he said. His voice had changed. She noticed it immediately. The operational flatness had acquired a different quality. Not softer, denser. The way a room sounds different when a third person enters it. Luca traced the phone message. And? The send point was inside this estate. The world paused. What? The message to your phone came from a device that was connected to our internal network at the time of sending. His voice was very controlled, very careful. Someone in this household sent you that message, or passed the number and the instruction to someone who did. Serena felt cold move through her from the sternum outward. Who? We're working on it. He set both hands flat on the table. I need you to understand what this means. It means there is someone in my organization inside this property who is either working for Caruso directly or passing information to someone who is. A traitor. A liability. He said the word with a specific precision, and she understood that he had reclaimed it from Enzo's usage and reapplied it to something concrete and actionable. Someone I trusted with access to this house, to my family. She watched his face. Do you know who it is? I have a list of 4 people with the network access and the proximity. He held her gaze. I am going to know within 24 hours. Serena looked at the table, at her coffee cup, at her own hands, which she made deliberately still. The message said to be smart about what comes next, she said. Yes. That's not a Caruso message. She looked up. That's a message from someone who knows you, who knows how you think. Be smart. That's personal. That's someone who has been in rooms with you, who knows your language. She held his gaze. Who on your list has been with you long enough to know how you talk? The silence that followed was the worst kind. The kind that means the answer exists and is already present in the room, and the person hearing the question already knows it. Adrian looked at her steadily. All 4 of them, he said. It was Ricci. Luca brought the confirmation to Adrian at 4 p.m. in the office, with Serena present because Adrian had not asked her to leave and she had not offered to, and because by that point the day had a quality of irreversible momentum that made the question of who was in which room feel beside the point. Marco Ricci. 34 years old, 6 years in the organization, handled internal communications and personnel logistics. Had been present for every senior meeting in the last 2 years. Had access to staff records, household schedules, and the security camera network. Had been on Caruso's payroll for 11 months. Luca laid out the documentation on the desk. Phone records, financial transfers routed through 3 intermediary accounts. A series of encrypted messages that had taken his technical team 9 hours to partially reconstruct. The transfers were substantial, consistent, methodical. The work of a man who had made a decision and executed it without visible doubt for nearly a year. Adrian sat behind the desk and looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Serena stood to his left. She looked at the documents too, at the dates, at the amounts, at the scope of what had been passed, not just the photographs, not just her phone number, but meeting schedules, security rotations, the names of capos, the routes used for shipments, a year of systematic interior erosion, delivered in careful pieces to a man who was assembling them into a weapon. Where is he? Adrian's voice was very quiet. East Wing. He doesn't know we know. Yet. Luca paused. How do you want to handle it? Adrian looked up from the documents. His face was fully operational now. The coldest version of it she had seen. The version that had no room in it for anything except the mechanics of decision. Bring him here, he said. Luca left. Serena waited for Adrian to say something. He didn't. He stood from the desk and moved to the window. The same window he had stood at this morning, the same garden, and stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the grounds with an expression that was not visible to her from behind. You trusted him, she said. Yes. For 6 years. Yes. She looked at the back of his head, at the set of his shoulders. I'm sorry. He said nothing for a moment. Then, don't be sorry. Be aware. He turned. This is what my world does to trust. It tests it until it fails. And when it fails, He stopped. The cold face had something running beneath it now, something she recognized from last night. The barely managed feeling, the vast, uncontained thing pressing at the inside of the composure. When it fails, the damage is not abstract. The damage has a face. In this case, it has Arya's face, and Caruso has had it for 36 hours. Serena held his gaze. "What does Caruso do with it?" she asked. "Nothing yet. He's still building." Adrian moved back to the desk. "But the audit is showing that Ricci passed more than photographs. He passed the security rotation schedule, the gate change times, the names of the detail I assigned to you this morning." His voice was very flat. "Caruso knows the gaps. He has a map of exactly where the perimeter is soft. The cold that had moved through her earlier came back and settled. Then tonight, everything changes." He sat. The rotations, the positions, the access points, everything Ricci gave them is useless by midnight. He looked at her. "But I need you to tell me something honestly." "What?" "Is there anyone from your life before this that Caruso could use to reach you? People who know you, who could be approached. Family, friends, anyone." She thought about it with the focused urgency the question deserved. Her mother was gone. Her father she hadn't seen in 10 years. Dana, her friend Dana, who had taken her to the bar 3 years ago, who still texted occasionally, who knew nothing about any of this except that Serena had taken a new job. "One person," she said. "A friend. She doesn't know anything, but she knows where I work, and she has this address." "Name." She gave it. Adrian passed it to Luca, who had reappeared in the doorway. Then Ricci walked in. He was younger looking than she'd expected from the name. A lean, dark-haired man with a face that was trying to appear normal, that was performing normalcy with an effort visible only in the very slight tightness around the eyes, the fractional control of the breathing. He stopped when he saw Luca behind him, looked at Adrian, looked at the documents on the desk. The performance of normalcy ended. "Sit down, Marco," Adrian said. Ricci sat. What followed was not the kind of confrontation that involved raised voices. It was colder than that. Adrian put the documents on the desk between them and said, with the total stillness of a man who had already completed his assessment and was now in execution mode, "Tell me when it started." Ricci looked at the documents, looked at Adrian. His face had gone gray. "It started..." Stopped, swallowed. 11 months ago. He approached me through an intermediary, financial problems. He stopped again. "It was supposed to be small. Information about shipment schedules. That was what you told yourself." Adrian's voice was not raised. It was level and precise and far more frightening than volume would have been. "And then it became the security rotations, and then the staff records, and then the photographs of my daughter." Ricci flinched. "I didn't know about the child. When the photographs were taken, I didn't know she was..." "You passed the camera positions to Caruso's surveillance team." Adrian's voice did not change. "You knew someone would be photographed. You made a choice about whose safety that was acceptable to compromise." "Adrian, I swear I didn't..." "Don't." The word cut clean. "Don't swear things to me right now. The mathematics of what you did are on this desk. What I need from you is specific. What does Caruso know about tonight's positions? What was in the last transmission?" Ricci's hands were clasped on the table in front of him. The knuckles were white. He told them. All of it came out. The last 3 transmissions, the specific information passed, the contact protocol, the drop schedule. He talked for 40 minutes, and Adrian listened with the absolute stillness of a man building a complete picture, asking precise questions when the information left gaps, allowing Ricci to fill the gaps without interruption. When it was done, Adrian looked at him for a long moment. "You'll stay in the East Wing," he said, "under supervision, until I decide what comes next." Ricci looked up. "Adrian, we're done talking." Luca moved forward. Ricci went without further words, the deflation of a man who has spent 11 months carrying something that has finally been set down, and the weight of what replaces it is worse. The door closed. Serena and Adrian were alone. The office was quiet. The documents were on the desk. Outside, the light was going. In the East Wing somewhere, Arya would be with Elena and Marco, eating whatever Elena had organized for dinner, telling Marco something earnest about fish or architecture or the acoustics of large houses. The last transmission, Serena said carefully. What specifically was in it? Adrian looked at her. The garden schedule, he said. The fountain. When Arya typically goes there and for how long. The room got very still. He told them where she'd be this evening, Serena said. Yes. She looked at the window, at the darkening garden, at the fountain that was barely visible in the dying light, where 3 fish swam in circles and a 4-year-old girl had stood on her stomach 2 hours ago and talked to them like they were listening. She wasn't there tonight, Serena said. No. His voice was careful. She wasn't there tonight. But they didn't know that in advance. No. She turned to look at him. His face had crossed into territory she had not seen before. Not the cold operational face, not the controlled management of feeling, something else. Something that was happening at the structural level, beneath the skill and the discipline and the years of learned impassivity, the thing that lives in a person before they learn to contain it. He was a man who had just understood, with complete clarity, that his 4-year-old daughter had been 30 minutes in a schedule from being in exactly the wrong place. Adrian, he stood abruptly, moved to the window with the urgency of a man who needed to be in motion or something would break. He stood with his hand on the frame and his back to her, and his breathing was controlled but only just, only through the kind of effort that is visible in the body even when the face is hidden. Serena crossed the room. She did not touch him. She stood beside him at the window and looked out at the dark garden and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would contain what this moment held, and she had learned enough about this man in 48 hours to know that what he needed was not comfort but company, the specific presence of another person who understood what was at stake and was not pretending it wasn't. They stood at the window. After a while, he said, very quietly, I have to send you away. She turned her head to look at him. His profile was rigid, set. The jaw she had learned to read, and what it was saying now was the most frightening thing she had seen on his face yet. Not anger, not cold, but resolution. The face of a man who has done the arithmetic and arrived at an answer he intends to act on regardless of the cost. What? She said. You and Arya, you need to leave the estate. He didn't look at her. I'll arrange a safe location, secure, staffed, nothing connected to me on any visible record. You'll be... Stop. Her voice came out harder than she intended. Stop. What are you doing? What I should have done before I acknowledged her. He turned now, and the resolution was complete. No ambiguity in it, no door left open. I made the decision too fast. I let what I felt... He stopped himself. I have a traitor in my organization. I have an enemy who has a map of my perimeter. I have a federal inquiry that Luca informed me this morning has escalated. My capos are not unified. And I have a 4-year-old child who was 30 minutes from being in the wrong place in my garden. His voice was not raised. It was the quietest and most absolute it had ever been. I cannot protect her here. I cannot protect you here. Not right now. Serena looked at him. You're not sending us to safety, she said. You're sending us away because you're afraid. I'm sending you away because the mathematics require... Don't. She stepped closer, not threatening, just refusing the distance. Don't do the arithmetic at me. You just sat at a table with the man who sold your daughter to your enemies, and you're going to let him win by keeping her alive. His voice cracked on the last word. Just fractionally, just enough. You think I want this? You think I am not... He stopped. Hard stop. His hand on the window frame tightened. I found out she existed 48 hours ago. 48 hours. And I have already... He stopped again. I cannot be what she needs right now while this is happening. I am not able to... He didn't finish. Serena looked at the man at the window, at the cracks in the architecture she had spent 2 days learning to read, and she felt the specific anguish of watching someone make the wrong decision for the right reasons and being unable to stop them. If you send us away, she said, very quietly, she will think you chose the empire over her. She is 4 years old and she will understand it exactly that way, and she will carry that for the rest of her life. Adrian said nothing. I know because I've watched her carry other things, Serena said. She carries things quietly, and she doesn't let you see, but they're there. Her voice stayed even with effort. She is your daughter. She is already yours. And if you send her away now, in the name of keeping her safe, the thing you will actually be doing is... Her phone buzzed. Both of them looked at it. She picked it up. Unknown number again. Different number. Same absence of area code. But this time it wasn't a message. It was a photograph. A photograph of Dana, Serena's friend Dana, the only person outside this estate who knew where Serena was, sitting in what appeared to be a coffee shop, taken from outside through a window. In the background, visible but not prominent, a man Serena had never seen, reading a newspaper 2 tables back. Facing Dana. Watching Dana. Below the photograph, 4 words. She doesn't know yet. Serena's hand went cold around the phone. She looked at Adrian. He had already read it over her shoulder. His face had gone completely, absolutely still. The stillness past composure, past management, the stillness of a man who has just watched the last variable in his calculation become a... The photograph was taken through glass, which meant whoever held the camera was outside, which meant Dana had no idea, which meant the clock on this particular problem had been running without Serena's knowledge and was now at a position she couldn't calculate. Adrian took the phone from her hand. Not rough, just decisive. The movement of a man shifting from processing to action. The gear change she had learned to recognize in him in 48 hours as the moment when feeling became function. He called Luca. 1 ring. "The friend," Adrian said. "Dana, where are we on her?" Luca's voice came through the speaker, clipped and fast. "Contact made 20 minutes ago. She's been moved to a secondary location. Our people have eyes on her. She doesn't know it yet. The photograph just came through. Someone was sitting 2 tables back in what looks like Marchetti's on 11th. We ID'd the tail 40 minutes ago. He's Caruso's, mid-level. He's watching, not moving. Keep it that way." Adrian's voice was flat. "She stays where she is. She doesn't move, and nobody approaches her from either side until I say so. Understood?" "Understood." He ended the call. Serena was still looking at the photograph on the phone screen, at Dana's face caught in 3/4 profile, laughing at something on her own phone, completely unaware of the man 2 tables back with his newspaper and his patience. Dana, who had taken her to a rooftop bar for her birthday 3 years ago. Dana, who texted emoji-heavy messages about her cat and her dating disasters, and who had cried at Arya's birthday party because she was that kind of person, the kind who cried at small, happy things because she felt them as large. "She's okay," Serena said. It was not a question. She needed to hear it said. "She's okay." Adrian set the phone down on the desk. "This is a message, not a move. Caruso is showing me his range, showing me that he can reach beyond this property, that my problem is not contained to these walls." He looked at her. "He is correct." "What do you do?" "I stop waiting for him to set the board." He moved to the door, pulled it open, and called down the hall. 2 men appeared within seconds. She didn't know their names, had been learning faces faster than names since yesterday, and Adrian spoke to them in rapid Italian, then turned back to her. "I need you in the East Wing with Arya for the next 4 hours. Elena will be with you. Don't come out for any reason unless Luca or I come to you directly." He held her gaze. "Not a staff member, not Enzo, me or Luca." She looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Ending this tonight." The way he said it, quiet, absolute, no room in it for revision, she understood that she was looking at a man who had made the decision she had watched him approach for 48 hours, and that the decision was not the one he had been moving toward when he talked about sending her away. Something had shifted. The photograph of Donna had shifted it. The trail that had led from Ricci's transmissions to her friend's coffee shop had shifted it, because it had made concrete and personal what had been until that moment a structural problem, and Adrian Viscari, whatever else he was not a man who could be abstract about a 4-year-old's eyes or a friend sitting unaware in a window seat. "Be careful," she said. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "Go," he said. The East Wing at night was a different kind of quiet from the rest of the house. Deeper. The walls were older in this section, the stone thicker, the windows smaller and higher. Serena sat on the floor of the playroom with her back against the couch, while Arya slept on the cushions above her, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, one small hand open on the pillow. Elena sat across the room in a chair by the door, a cup of tea going cold beside her. They had been there for 2 hours. "He's done this before," Elena said. Not loudly, just into the quiet room. This specific kind of night, where everything that's been building finally reaches a point where he decides to meet it directly instead of managing it from the side. Does it work? It has, 4 times that I know of. She paused. It has not worked once. He has never lost the direct confrontation. But she stopped. But what? Elena looked at her tea. The cost is always something real. He always pays with something he didn't price in advance. Serena looked at Arya's sleeping face, at the small open hand. What has he paid before? The first time it was 2 years in federal scrutiny that cost him 3 allied families who decided the exposure wasn't worth the relationship. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, the voice of someone who had lived inside this world long enough to have no illusions about its texture. The second time it was his closest friend who turned out to have been on the wrong side of the confrontation. She paused. The third time it was my husband. The room was very still. "I'm sorry," Serena said. Johnny knew what he was. Elena's voice was even. Not numb. There was feeling in it, just long settled. The feeling of something that had been integrated into the self rather than separated from it. He chose it. We both chose it. She looked at Serena. You didn't choose it. I chose to come here. Knowing and not knowing. Yes. Elena was quiet for a moment. He's different with her. With Arya. She said it carefully, like someone turning something fragile in their hands. I have watched my brother manage every relationship in his life for 20 years. With me. With Gianni. With the men who work for him. There is always a component that is strategic, not dishonest, not cold, but managed. He decides how much to give, and he gives exactly that. She looked at the sleeping child on the couch. With her, he doesn't know how to do that. He has no setting for it. She just walks in, and he has no management. Serena felt her chest tighten. He's going to try to send us away, she said. He was in the middle of deciding it when the photograph came through. Elena turned to look at her. I know. He's going to decide it's the safest option for her. He always decides the safest option. Elena's voice was quiet. He has been deciding the safest option for the people he loves since he was 19 years old and took over an organization that was bleeding out, and every safe option he has ever chosen has cost him something he didn't expect to care about. She paused. Do not let him decide it this time. It's not my decision to stop. It is partly. Elena looked at her with the directness of a woman who had spent years learning to say difficult things without softening them into uselessness. You have leverage he doesn't know you have. Which is? She already called him Dad. Elena's voice was simple. Do you understand what that means to a man like Adrian? She didn't wait. She didn't negotiate. She just decided, and she said it, and he has been completely undone by it ever since. She held Serena's gaze. He will do anything to be worthy of that word, including the wrong thing, if the wrong thing looks like protection. She paused. Remind him what the right thing looks like. Serena looked at Arya, at the small hand, at the green eyes closed in sleep. She thought about a morning 3 years ago and the decision she had made in the 4 years of carrying it and the moment yesterday, had it only been yesterday, when she had walked through an iron gate and into a life she had known, some part of her had always known, she was walking back into. I will, she said. The call came at 1:47 a.m. Luca's voice, short. It's done. Come to the main room. Serena came out of the east wing and down the stairs and into the large formal room that she had walked through on her first day and found it populated with people she had not seen before. Men who looked like they had been outdoors and operational recently. The specific alert stillness of people who had just completed something physical and hadn't fully come down from it yet. Luca was near the door. 2 men she didn't recognize flanted the fireplace. And Adrian was standing at the window on the far wall with his back to the room and his right hand at his side, and something in the set of him that told her, before he turned, that the night had cost something. She crossed the room. He turned when he heard her approach. There was a cut above his left eye, small. It had been cleaned, or was clean enough, but it was there, a line of dark red at the edge of his eyebrow. And he had taken his jacket off at some point, and the sleeve of his shirt was torn at the shoulder. He looked like a man who had been in a room where things went physically wrong and had come out the other side of it, but only just. "Dana is safe," he said, before she could speak. "She's been moved to a location she understands as a friend's place. She doesn't know anything beyond that. She'll be home by morning." "Caruso?" He looked at her for a moment. "Caruso is no longer in a position to threaten this family," he said. It was precise language. She noticed the precision. She didn't ask for more than precision, not tonight. "And Ricci?" "Handled." Again precise. Again she let it be. She looked at the cut above his eye. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You have a cut above your eye, and you've been standing at that window for 20 minutes projecting calm at a room full of people who don't need you to project calm. Sit down." Something moved across his face. He sat. She found the first aid kit. It was where Elena had told her it was, in the cabinet by the door, the kind of household that maintained it well-stocked and accessible, which told its own story. And she came back and sat across from him and opened it. The room was emptying around them. Luca was directing the exodus with the quiet efficiency of a man who recognized a private moment when it arrived and had the good sense to clear it. Serena pressed a gauze pad to the cut. He was still. "How bad was it?" she asked. "Manageable." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her from close range. They were close. Her hand at his face, his eyes on hers, the specific intimacy of someone applying pressure to a wound. "It was what it needed to be," he said. She cleaned the cut. He didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt, but because flinching was not something he was configured for, and she had already understood this about him. "I was going to send you away," he said. "I know. I was in the middle of deciding it. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. "The photograph of your friend changed the calculation. If they can reach outside the estate, then outside the estate is not safer than—" He stopped, started again with the particular care of someone making himself be accurate rather than strategic. "I told myself it was the calculation, that the math changed." "Was it?" He looked at her. "Partially." She pressed a fresh piece of gauze to the cut and held it. "What was the other part?" He didn't answer immediately. His hands were on his knees. The room was almost empty now. Somewhere upstairs, Arya was sleeping with her rabbit and her 3 fish-shaped convictions about the world. "She said the word he said, 4 times today. She said it in the garden, and she said it at dinner, and she said it when Elena was putting her to bed. I was in the hall, and I heard it through the door. Dad. Like it was already just a word for a thing that existed." He looked at the floor. "I have been afraid of very few things in my adult life. The specific fears I've allowed myself are limited and managed, and I know exactly what they are." "Is ma shis." He paused. "I have been afraid of this since she said it the first time, and I have been trying to decision-make my way out of the fear instead of—" He stopped. Serena removed the gauze. The cut was small and clean. She put a butterfly closure on it with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. "Instead of what?" she asked. "Instead of just being afraid." He looked up at her. "And staying anyway." The room was quiet. She looked at him, at the cut above his eye, the torn sleeve, the hands on his knees, and she thought about 3 years ago, and a hotel window, and a sleeping face, and a decision she had made in under 5 minutes that had shaped the last 4 years of her life. "That's the only option," she said. "There is no version of this where you're not afraid. She makes you afraid because she matters. That's the whole thing." She closed the first aid kit. "Welcome to it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically, just with the deliberate care of a man who had spent the last 8 hours in operational mode and was finding his way back to something human, and held it, and she let him. "I need to tell you something else," he said. "Okay. The federal inquiry. I told you this morning it had escalated." He kept his voice even. His hand was still around hers. "Luca received confirmation tonight while we were dealing with Caruso. A grand jury has been convened. My primary financial structures are the target." He met her eyes. This is a serious problem, the kind that does not resolve in a week. Serena absorbed this. How serious? The kind where I may lose significant assets, where the organization may contract considerably. He was watching her face, where the life I can offer is materially different from the life that existed when you walked through that gate. Are you telling me this because you want me to leave? I'm telling you this because you deserve accurate information. His voice was firm on this. Not managed information, not the version that makes the decision I want you to make. The actual situation. She looked at him. The actual situation, she said slowly, is that you have a daughter upstairs who named 3 fish after breakfast foods and days of the week. And she called you Dad 4 times today, and you spent tonight doing whatever you did so that she could wake up tomorrow in a house where no one is watching her through a camera. She held his gaze. The federal inquiry is a problem you solve. The Caruso situation is a problem you solved. Ricci is a problem you solved. She paused. I am not a problem. Arya is not a problem. We are the part that is not a problem. Something in his face went very still. You should be angrier at me, he said, for all of it, for what my world brought to your door in 48 hours. I'm furious at you. She said it simply, without heat. I will probably be furious at you about different things for a long time. That's a separate issue from whether I'm going anywhere. He looked at her. Why? He said. Just that. Honest and stripped down, the question of a man who has managed everything for long enough that genuine confusion about a person's motivation is remarkable. She thought about Arya saying the word. Thought about the 4 years before it. The weight of carrying something alone. The specific exhaustion of being the only person who loved a child the exact right amount. Thought about a rooftop bar and 3 hours of conversation and a face she had tried to scale down in her memory and failed. Because she needs you, Serena said. And because I think maybe I've needed you to exist in my life as something other than a memory for a while. She paused. And because you cleaned that cut yourself before I got there, but you left the gauze on wrong, which tells me you're not actually as self-sufficient as you perform. He looked at her for a moment. Then something happened in his face. Not the almost smile from before, not the controlled warmth, but something older and less managed than either. Something that had been waiting behind the operational mask for longer than she had known him. He pulled her toward him, not suddenly, with the same deliberate care of every physical thing he did. The care of a man who moved through the world with awareness of his own weight. She went, because she was tired and he was warm, and because the last 4 years had been a long time to carry something alone, and she was done carrying it alone. They sat like that for a while. The house was quiet. The garden was dark. Somewhere in the city, Dana was home, or almost home, without knowing how close she had sat to the edge of someone else's war. Upstairs, Arya slept. The morning came gray and cold and operational. Adrian was on the phone by 6. Serena could hear it from the kitchen, the rhythmic, clipped quality of a man managing multiple lines of a complex situation, the specific voice that meant he had shifted fully back into function. She made coffee and fed Arya, who wanted to know if Frank had been fed, and then sat at the table with her own cup and listened to the house calibrate itself around the new reality of what yesterday had been. Luca came to the kitchen at 7:30. He stood in the doorway with the look of a man who was about to deliver information he had assessed as relevant and was choosing his moment. Serena looked at him over her cup. The grand jury, he said. The sealed indictment. We got a copy through a source in the DA's office. He paused. It's not what we thought. She set her cup down. What do you mean? The target is broader than the financial structures. He came into the kitchen. His voice was low, positioned below Arya's hearing. Arya was at the table with a drawing she was executing with considerable focus. They have a cooperating witness, someone inside the organization who has been feeding the federal investigation for... He stopped. Longer than Ricci. Serena went cold. How much longer? Luca looked at her with the steady, careful expression of a man delivering the worst piece of information in a morning already full of bad information. The indictment was drafted 14 months ago, he said. Before Caruso's approach, before Ricci, before... He paused. Before you arrived. She stared at him. You're saying there's someone else? I'm saying the federal inquiry didn't escalate because of Caruso. It escalated because someone inside this organization has been building a case for over a year, and the case is nearly complete, and he stopped. The sound of Adrian's footsteps in the hall. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Luca's face and Serena's, and the quality of the silence between them. Tell me, he said. Luca told him. Serena watched Adrian's face go through something she had not seen before and could not fully name, not the cold operational face, not the managed feeling, but something at the foundation level, the look of a man who has just understood that the ground he thought he was standing on has been hollow for over a year, and that everything he has built, every decision he has made, every move he has calculated in 14 months has been made on the basis of information that was being fed selectively to someone he trusted. Who? Adrian said. Luca looked at him. The indictment names a cooperating witness, he said. The name is redacted in the copy we have, but the access level described, the specific information in the filing, there are 2 people in this organization with that access. Adrian was absolutely still. One of them is you, Luca said quietly. The other is Enzo. The name landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height, not loud, just final, the sound of a thing that cannot be put back. Adrian did not move. He stood at the kitchen doorway with his hand still on the frame, and Serena watched his face do something she had not seen it do in 4 days of watching it carefully. It went completely blank. Not the operational blankness, not the controlled management of feeling. Blank in the way that a screen goes blank when the power cuts. A total absence of whatever had been running. Arya was still drawing at the table. She had not looked up. Luca stood with his hands at his sides, waiting with the stillness of a man who has delivered the worst possible information and is now allowing the person who received it the time they need to convert it into something they can act on. Show me, Adrian said. His voice was level. It was the most frightening level she had ever heard from him, because it was the level of a man who has gone past the point where feeling is a factor and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it that she did not have a name for. Luca pulled a folded document from inside his jacket. Adrian took it without looking at it immediately, turned it over once in his hands, then looked at Serena. Stay in the kitchen, he said. Adrian, please. The word came out differently from everything else he said, not commanding, just a man asking. Stay here with her, please. She looked at him. Okay, she said. He walked out. Luca followed. Serena sat back down at the table across from Arya, who had selected a red crayon and was applying it to something that appeared to be a fish with unusually elaborate fins. Is Dad okay? Arya asked, without looking up. He's handling something. Something hard? Yes. Arya considered this. She switched to a blue crayon. He'll be okay, she said, with the simple certainty of a 4-year-old who has decided a thing and sees no reason to revise it. He fixed the fish thing. Serena looked at her daughter. He did, she said, so he can fix this. Arya looked up briefly, made brief eye contact with the authority of someone stating an obvious fact, and returned to her fish. He's good at fixing. Serena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and made herself breathe and said nothing, because Arya was correct in the way that 4-year-olds are sometimes correct. Not through analysis, not through information, but through some uncluttered directness of perception that adults spend decades learning to complicate. Enzo was in his office in the East Wing. Adrian knew the geography of his own house with the completeness of a man who had grown up in it and then returned to run it. Knew which floorboards registered weight, knew which doors sat slightly uneven in their frames, and required a specific handle position to open silently. Knew the acoustics of the East Corridor well enough to know that the sound of his own footsteps would arrive before he did. He didn't try to be quiet. Enzo heard him coming. Adrian knew this because when he pushed open the office door, Enzo was already turned toward it, already standing, already wearing the face of a man who has been waiting for a conversation and has had time to prepare for it. The preparation showed in the squareness of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the way his hands were loose at his sides, deliberately loose. The practiced neutrality of someone who has decided that the way to survive the next 10 minutes is to appear entirely unafraid. Adrian came into the room and closed the door behind him. He put the document on the desk between them. He did not sit. Enzo looked at the document, looked at Adrian. How long have you been reading my files? Enzo asked. How long have you been building a federal case against me? Adrian said. The silence between them had the compressed quality of a room where two people are speaking in parallel about the same thing from opposite sides of it. Enzo looked at the document again. His jaw worked once. You don't understand what that is. I understand exactly what it is. 14 months of testimony, access logs, transaction records, 3 years of organizational structure provided to a federal grand jury by a cooperating witness who had the specific access level of... Adrian stopped. He was looking at Enzo with the blank screen face, and his voice was still level, still that frightening level, and the only tell was his right hand, which had curled once at his side and then deliberately opened. My brother-in-law's brother, my sister's family. Someone I put in this office because Gianni asked me to, and I trusted Gianni, and Gianni is dead and cannot be asked anything. Enzo said nothing. Tell me why, Adrian said. Because you were going to destroy everything. Enzo's voice came out harder than she had expected. Not defensive, not apologetic, but carrying its own conviction. The voice of a man who has believed something long enough that it has become structural. Because you have been running this organization like a closed system for 6 years. No input, no accountability, no consideration of the cost to the people who actually execute your decisions. Because Gianni died because of a call you made that he disagreed with, and you made anyway. And he followed you anyway because that is what everyone does. They follow you, and when it goes wrong, they pay, and you manage. Adrian's jaw set. Gianni's death was the fourth decision in 18 months that went wrong because you wouldn't listen. Enzo's voice was cracking at the edges now, not breaking, but showing the fractures that had been behind the composed surface. And when I went to you after and told you that the organization needed oversight, accountability, some kind of external check on your judgment, you told me to manage my grief and stay in my lane. His eyes were hard. So I found a different lane. You built a federal case against your own family. I built leverage. I was never going to use it. I was never going to let it go to indictment. I had arrangements in place that would have kept it sealed as long as the organization... He stopped, redirected. It was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to be the thing you couldn't ignore. The thing that meant you finally had to listen to someone other than yourself. 14 months of testimony, Adrian said very quietly. 14 months of names, roots, structures, financial architecture. 14 months that Caruso's people spent trying to figure out why a federal case kept appearing and disappearing around my organization until they found the source. Until they found you. He held Enzo's gaze. The surveillance on this house was not about Arya. It was about confirming that you were still active, that the leverage was still in play. Enzo went still. Caruso wasn't threatening me through my daughter, Adrian said. He was threatening you. He was threatening to expose you to me before you were ready. The photograph of Serena and Arya. That was a message to you. A deadline. Cooperate or be exposed. He watched Enzo's face process this. You sent the message to Serena's phone. Not because Caruso told you to, because you were trying to scare her off before I got attached enough to, before she became something you couldn't use to move me. The room was absolutely quiet. Enzo's composure had developed visible cracks. Not collapse. This was not a man who collapsed, but the fine-line fractures of a structure that has been holding more than it was designed for longer than was sustainable. I didn't want the child involved, Enzo said. His voice had lost the hard conviction. It was something more exposed now, something that had been under the conviction the whole time. I didn't know about her until she walked through the gate. When I saw her, He stopped. I panicked. I needed Serena to leave before you claimed her publicly and locked yourself in. You panicked, Adrian said. Yes, you panicked and you sent a threatening message to the phone of a woman who had done nothing, about a child who had done nothing. His voice was still level. Still that terrible level. You used my daughter to try to manage me. Enzo said nothing. Gianni would not. Adrian stopped himself. The name. The name cost him something, visibly. The first visible cost in this entire conversation. He stood very still for a moment. Then, sit down, Enzo. Adrian, sit down. Enzo sat. Adrian remained standing, looking at the man across the desk. His brother-in-law's brother, the man who had been in this organization because of a connection to a dead man, who had watched that dead man follow Adrian into a decision that had killed him, and had spent 14 months building a weapon out of grief and conviction, and the specific corrosive patience of someone who believes they are doing the right thing. The federal case, Adrian said, the arrangements you have in place to keep it sealed. I need them. All of them. Every contact, every sealed document, every intermediary. He held Enzo's gaze. You will give me everything, and I will use it to close this before it reaches indictment. Enzo stared at him. And then, he said, and then you leave this organization. Adrian's voice was final. Not violently, not publicly. You resign your accounts, you take what is yours, and you go. Elena will not be told the full scope of what you did. She has lost enough. He paused. That is the offer. Enzo looked at him for a long moment. That's all, he said. You have been in this house for 6 years, Adrian said. You are connected to my sister. You believed what you were doing was right. I understand the belief, even though the execution was, he stopped. You do not belong in this organization. That has been true for some time, but you are not my enemy, Enzo. You were Gianni's family. That is still real. Something moved across Enzo's face, the last of the conviction, redistributing itself into something more complicated and more honest. I'm sorry about the girl, he said, quietly. Arya, she shouldn't have been any part of it. Adrian looked at him steadily. No, she shouldn't, Juan. The materials arrived at Adrian's desk by 10 a.m. They were extensive, more extensive than Adrian had expected, which told its own story about the amount of time Enzo had spent constructing the thing he had called leverage, and Adrian had spent the last 2 hours refusing to call by any name at all. 3 contact names in the DA's office, a sealed storage location for physical documentation, 2 digital archives with access credentials, a record of every communication between Enzo and his federal contact for 14 months. Luca went through it with 2 of his technical team. By noon, they had a clear picture of the entire architecture. By 2 p.m., they had made contact with the first of the 3 names in the DA's office, a man named Holt, who had, it turned out, motivations for wanting this particular case to remain sealed that were entirely his own and entirely sufficient. Serena did not ask for the details of the conversations that followed. She understood, in the way she had been understanding things all week, that the details existed in a category she was not equipped to adjudicate and was not being asked to adjudicate. What she was being asked was simpler and harder. To be present, to be honest, to stay. She was staying. Arya, for her part, spent most of the day attempting to teach Marco the correct names for the fish, which Marco kept getting wrong. The correct names were, Arya maintained with considerable intensity, Bread, Tuesday, and Frank. Marco kept calling them by colors, the orange one, the small one, the one that was fast. This was, in Arya's view, a fundamental categorical error that required correction. Serena sat in the garden near the fountain and watched them argue and felt, underneath all the accumulated weight of the last 4 days, something she hadn't felt in a long time, like she was somewhere, not visiting, not managing, not in transit between one set of survival calculations and the next. Somewhere. Elena found her there at 3 in the afternoon. She came and sat beside her on the bench without asking, which Serena had already understood was Elena's way. She did not ask permission for things she had already decided were acceptable. She had a glass of water, and she sat and looked at the fountain and said nothing for a while. He told me Enzo is leaving, she said finally. Yes. He didn't tell me why. Serena looked at her. Elena turned to meet her eyes. I know there's a why, she said simply. I know it's significant. I know Adrian is protecting me from it. She looked back at the fountain. I have been protected from significant things for most of my adult life. Gianni protected me. Adrian protects me. I used to resent it. She paused. I've come to understand that it's a form of love, even when it's also a form of control. Do you want to know? Serena asked. Elena was quiet for a moment. Not today, she said. Today I want to sit here and watch those children argue about fish names and not know anything I didn't know this morning. Okay, Serena said. They sat. The afternoon light was long and gold, and the fountain made its constant small sound, and Arya had apparently won the fish-naming argument because Marco was now saying frank with the resigned acceptance of someone who has lost a debate fair and square. "She's remarkable," Elena said. "She is." Serena watched her daughter crouch at the fountain edge with the pellet container. "She's been remarkable since she was about 6 weeks old and looked at me like she was already annoyed by how little I knew." Elena almost laughed, a real sound, unguarded. "She has his eyes and your stubbornness." "I'm not stubborn." "You came here," Elena said simply. Serena looked at her. "You came to this house knowing what you knew and not knowing what you didn't know. And you walked through that gate carrying a 4-year-old girl with emerald green eyes into the home of a man who runs a criminal empire, and you sat at his dinner table and you didn't flinch." Elena's voice was warm and direct. "That is either remarkable courage or remarkable stubbornness. Possibly both." Serena thought about it. "She needed a father," she said. "She'd been asking me questions for a year and I was out of answers that were good enough." She paused. "I was out of answers that were fair to her." "And now?" Serena looked at Arya, who was lying on her stomach at the fountain edge, Frank adjacent, describing something at length to the fish in the earnest monologue of a child who saw no reason why fish shouldn't be interested in her theories. "Now she has answers," Serena said. Adrian came to find her at 5. He looked different from the morning, not lighter exactly, but settled. The cut above his eye had a dark edge to it in the afternoon light, and he had changed the torn shirt, and he moved without the compressed urgency of a man managing multiple simultaneous catastrophes. He moved like a man who had reached the far side of something. He sat beside her on the bench. Arya and Marco had gone inside with Elena 20 minutes earlier, the fish interaction having reached its natural endpoint. The garden was quiet. "The federal case?" he said. "It's being managed. It won't reach indictment." He said it without elaboration, and she accepted it without asking for elaboration, and neither of them pretended this transaction was uncomplicated. "Caruso?" she asked. "Reached out through an intermediary this morning. He is interested in a negotiated resolution of the territorial dispute." His voice was dry. "He finds himself in a less advantageous position than he occupied 48 hours ago. Because his leverage, Enzo, is gone. Because his leverage is gone and his surveillance network has been dismantled, and 2 of his operational people are unavailable." He paused. "We'll negotiate. It will be tedious and long and will resolve in something that serves both parties adequately and neither party fully. That is how these things end." "And Ricci?" A pause. "Ricci is gone from this organization. He'll have the opportunity to rebuild something elsewhere if he's intelligent about it." He held her gaze. "I don't believe in destroying people who were broken before they betrayed me." She thought about that. "Were you? Broken before he betrayed me?" "Yes." He considered it with the honesty she had learned to expect from him in the hours since the night before. He had financial problems. He was afraid, and he took the door that was offered. That is not admirable, but it's human. He looked at the fountain. "I am running an organization that creates conditions where people become afraid of exactly those choices. That is also true." They sat with that. After a while he said, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me. I have been in this organization since I was 19 years old." His voice was careful, measured, but not managed. The difference she had learned to listen for. "I took it over because there was no one else, and because I was suited to it in ways I didn't choose to be suited to. I built it, and I defended it, and I made the decisions that kept it standing." He paused. I was not building toward anything. I was sustaining, maintaining, keeping the thing from falling." He turned to look at her. "I didn't know what I would build toward until 4 days ago." She looked at him. "Arya," he said. It wasn't the only thing he meant, and they both knew it, but it was the right place to begin. "Yes," she said. He stopped, started again. "I want to be something she can be honest about. When she's older. When she understands what this world is and makes her own decisions about it." He held Serena's gaze. "I cannot give her a father who is something different from what I am, but I can give her a father who is honest about it, who doesn't make her carry the weight of pretending." Serena thought about Arya in the bath saying he looked at me sad, like the way you look at pictures of grandma. thought about the uncanny precision of it, the directness of a child who had never been taught to look away from what she saw. "She'll respect that," Serena said. "She'll hold you to it." "I know." He said it without fear. "I want her to." The garden was going toward evening. The light was losing its gold and becoming something cooler, more blue. The fountain sound was steady and constant. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked at him. "From this," he said. "Not what Arya wants. Not what the organization requires. What do you want?" She thought about it. Not the fast answer, not the managed answer, but the actual answer that lived underneath the 4 years of carrying things alone and the 4 days of not carrying them alone. "I want her to grow up knowing both of us," she said. "Together. Not 2 households, not scheduled visits, not a situation she has to navigate between." She held his gaze. "I want her to have the things she didn't have. A table where everyone eats together. A house where the people in it are honest with each other even when it's hard." She paused. "I want to stop being afraid of how much I feel about you, which I have been feeling since I watched you watch her at that breakfast table, and you had no idea how to manage it." He was looking at her with that unguarded expression that was the most honest face she had seen on him. "That's a lot to want from a man who runs a criminal empire," he said. "You're also a man who put a butterfly closure on his own cut wrong and sat at a table with a 4-year-old who called him dad and didn't know what to do with his hands." She held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of what you run. I'm aware of it. There's a difference." He reached out and touched her face, the same deliberate care, the same weight behind the gentleness, and she turned into it the way you turn toward warmth. "I'm going to ask you properly," he said. "Not tonight. Not because the capos need it or the organization requires it, or any other reason except that I want to do it correctly, when this week is not the context." He held her eyes. "But I'm telling you now so you know it's coming." "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat as the garden went to evening. 6 months later, the Viscari estate was lit from every window. Not the formal lights, not the cold, impressive lighting of a house presenting itself. The warm, specific light of a house where people were inside doing something that mattered. Tables had been moved to the private garden, the one with the fountain, and they were covered in white cloth and flowers and the small, fat candles that Elena had spent 3 days selecting because she had decided that if her brother was getting married, it was going to look like it meant something. It meant something. Arya was wearing a dress she had selected herself after a process of negotiation that Serena had agreed to and immediately regretted, because Arya had opinions about dresses that were specific and structural and not easily redirected. The dress was pale green. Specifically, she had told the woman at the shop, the color of new leaves. The woman had found it. Arya had declared it correct. She walked ahead of her parents with a basket of petals and distributed them with the considered accuracy of someone who understood that this was a ceremonial role with standards. She did not scatter them randomly. She placed them. Marco walked beside her in the small dark suit Elena had made him wear and kept reaching into Arya's basket to steal petals. And Arya kept redirecting his hand with the firm patience of a child who had decided this occasion required management. Adrian stood at the far end of the garden near the fountain. He was in a dark suit, well-fitted, no tie, the collar open in the way she had first seen him. And he was watching Arya come down the makeshift aisle with an expression that she thought, from 40 feet away, he was not entirely managing. The hard jaw was there, the green eyes, the stillness. But something in the stillness was different from every other time she had observed it. It was not the stillness of a man containing himself. It was the stillness of a man who had nowhere to contain himself toward, because everything he wanted was already here, moving toward him, in the form of a 4-year-old in a pale green dress and her mother behind her in the afternoon light. Serena walked toward him. She thought about a rooftop bar and 3 hours of conversation, and a sleeping face in a hotel window, and 6 weeks of not knowing, and 4 years of knowing everything alone, and 4 days of the most frightening week of her life. And she thought, all of that was the road. All of it led to this garden, and this man, and this child dropping flower petals with the concentration of a small professional. She reached him. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across a lamplit library on the first night, and across a kitchen table with a photograph between them, and from a window with his jaw set and his hand curled at his side, but also differently from all of those times because the thing he was looking at now was not a complication to manage or a decision to make, but simply a person he had chosen, and the choosing was complete. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Arya appeared between them with her basket, looked up at both of them with the evaluating eyes that saw everything, and said, "You can start now. I'm ready." There was quiet laughter from the people gathered around them. Elena, with her hand over her mouth. Luca, in the second row, looking like a man who had decided that one occasion in 6 years warranted a facial expression. Marco, next to Elena, already bored and already reaching for the remaining petals in Arya's basket, which Arya blocked without looking. Adrian crouched down to Arya's level. He was not a man who crouched. He was a man of considerable height and physical authority, and he moved through the world at his own elevation. But he went down to where she was, without ceremony, without self-consciousness, the way he had learned to do in 6 months of evenings that looked like bath time and bedtime stories, and breakfast tables and arguments about fish and all the small, irreplaceable mechanics of a life shared. "Thank you for being ready," he said. Arya looked at him seriously. "I was ready a long time ago," she said. "You were the ones taking forever." He looked at her, at the green eyes that were his own eyes, in a face that was Serena's face, and also entirely her own face, the face of a person who was 4 years old and complete and entirely herself, and had been waiting with better patience than anyone in this story for the world to catch up to what she had already decided was true. He put his hand on her small shoulder for a moment. Then he stood and looked at Serena, and the person with the small book of vows began to read, and the fountain made its constant sound, and the evening light came down through the old oaks and lay gold and warm across the garden and across the people in it. Arya stood between her parents and held both their hands. She did not fidget. She did not steal Marco's attention. She simply stood, straight and present, looking at the fountain with the settled quality of someone who has arrived somewhere they intended to be and was content to be still in it and did not feel the need to name it or explain it. She already knew what it was. It was the thing that had always been coming, the thing that had existed in the form of a man's eyes and a woman's stubbornness, and one night on a rooftop and 6 weeks of not knowing, and 4 years of knowing alone, and 4 days of a house that tested everything. It had always been coming, and it had arrived, and it was ordinary and extraordinary in exactly equal measure, the way the best things always are. In the fountain, 3 fish moved in slow circles. The one nearest the edge surfaced once, briefly, the way Frank always did at this hour, and then went back down into the cool, dark water, and the ripples spread and dissolved, and the surface went still, and above it the evening held its gold for one long moment before the stars began, one by one, to appear.